Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right, and yet something still feels off? You meditate in the mornings, you write your affirmations, you visualize your ideal life with quiet devotion, you speak kindly, you read the books, you do the work. But deep down, in the quiet space beneath all the effort, there's a restlessness, a quiet ache, a soft exhaustion that never really leaves, as if your soul is whispering, "I'm tired," even while your mind insists, "Keep going." This is a paradox many seekers live in. You want to rise, you want to vibrate higher, you want to feel free, but somehow, despite your discipline, despite your commitment, you still feel stuck in an emotional loop you can't name. And when that happens, a cruel kind of guilt can settle in. Why am I not further along? Why don't I feel lighter yet? That guilt becomes resistance, and that resistance becomes a cage. What if the problem isn't your practice, but the emotional atmosphere you're practicing inside of? Neville Goddard once said, "Feeling is the secret, not repetition, not perfection, not performance. What creates your reality is not what you think, but what you feel safe enough to feel. And what most of us feel, silently, unconsciously, is a background vibration of fear, unworthiness, control. We think we're evolving, but we're still emotionally recycling, still rehearsing old stories in the body, even while the mind writes new scripts." Joe Dispenza explains this with precision. The body becomes addicted to familiar emotional states. It clings to them, even when they hurt, because what is known feels safer than what is free. That's the neurochemical loop. That's the sabotage hidden in plain sight. And so we arrive at the subtle truth. Your vibration is not shaped by what you do, but by what you're still emotionally repeating. You can meditate every morning, but if your inner world is looping the same echoes of pain, doubt, or comparison, you will stay anchored to the past, even as you dream of the future. There are hidden traps, quiet patterns that look spiritual but keep you emotionally stagnant, habits that mimic growth but actually repeat the vibration of fear or scarcity beneath the surface. Today, we will uncover 3 of these traps, not to shame you, not to fix you, but to free you from the emotional choreography that no longer serves your becoming. Because this isn't about effort, it's about congruence, emotional coherence, living in harmony with what you want instead of performing your way toward it. So ask yourself, gently, what if the reason you don't feel as high as you think is because you're still carrying emotional weights you've never seen? Let's begin to see them together. Sometimes, what you're feeling right now isn't truly about now. It's a memory, a residue, a sensation from a long-closed chapter that never really ended inside your nervous system. You might be sitting in your home, surrounded by safety, by warmth, by intentions of healing, and still, your body is bracing. Still, your chest is tight. Still, your breath is shallow. And you wonder why. Why does it feel like you're always preparing for something to go wrong? This is the emotional echo. It's subtle. It's convincing. It masquerades as your present-day reality, but it's actually an old vibration playing on loop, one that you've become so used to, you no longer question it. The brain, wired by years of familiarity, recreates what it knows. And if what it knows is heartbreak, disappointment, abandonment, it will summon those feelings even when nothing is actually wrong. You may visualize a new life with your mind, but if your emotional body is still vibrating with the pain of who you used to be, you're not actually creating a new reality. You're reanimating the old one. And this is not your fault. It's not because you're broken. It's because your nervous system was trained to protect you, to anticipate, to prepare. It learned that the best way to stay safe was to stay in control, even if that control means staying in pain. Think of it like this. You're trying to tune into a new radio station, one that plays the music of freedom, love, abundance. But your antenna is still pointed toward a signal from the past. It can't catch the new frequency because it's still vibrating with the emotional static of yesterday. You can't will your way out of this loop. You can't outthink it because it's not happening in your thoughts. It's happening in your chemistry, in your cells. in the quiet, instinctive layers of you that still believe danger lives around the corner, even when the corner is clear. True vibrational freedom doesn't come from ignoring this echo. It comes from recognizing it, from feeling it gently, from letting it surface, not as a threat, but as a signal, one that says, there's a part of me still waiting to be seen. And when you see it, not with fear, not with shame, but with presence, that loop begins to dissolve. Not because you forced it to, but because you no longer needed it to protect you. What if the heaviness you feel isn't who you are, but who you once needed to be? Let that question linger. Let it breathe inside you, because this is where real change begins. Not in effort, but in remembrance. There's a subtle moment when devotion becomes performance, when the rituals you once embraced as sacred begin to feel like obligations. You wake up early, light your candle, sit on your cushion, you repeat your affirmations. You visualize with care. You try to feel aligned, elevated, prepared. But somewhere in the middle of all that doing, something starts to feel hollow, mechanical, like you're checking boxes on a spiritual to-do list, but the aliveness is missing. This is the illusion of effort. The belief that more practice equals more alignment. That the path to high vibration is paved with constant self-improvement. That if you just do enough, you will eventually become enough. It sounds noble, it feels disciplined, but underneath, there is often a quiet fear, a fear of stopping, of being still, of simply being without performing your progress. And that fear is what drains you, because the ego is clever. It doesn't always show up with arrogance. Sometimes it wears robes. It speaks the language of light. It tells you that you must try harder, cleanse deeper, meditate longer. It whispers that your current state is never quite enough, that you must reach a higher version of yourself before you can rest. But that version never arrives. Joe Dispenza reminds us that real transformation happens not through repetition, but through a change in state of being. You don't shift your vibration by doing things differently. You shift by being someone new. And that being emerges in stillness, in surrender, in the spaciousness beyond effort. When your spiritual practices become a form of emotional control, they stop being spiritual. They become a strategy, a mental game of self-improvement rooted in lack. The irony is painful. In your effort to transcend the ego, you end up feeding it. There is nothing wrong with your rituals. They are beautiful, sacred, but they are not the source of your power. They are not what makes you worthy, radiant, magnetic. That power comes from the quality of presence you bring to each moment, not from how many moments you fill with spiritual activity. Imagine trying to water a garden by squeezing the hose tighter. The pressure builds, the effort intensifies, but the flow becomes blocked. You don't need more pressure, you need more openness, more trust, more presence. So if your rituals feel empty, if your days feel spiritually dense instead of light, it might not be because you're not doing enough. It might be because you've forgotten that you already are enough, and that the truest frequency rises not from control, but from coherence. Who would you be if you stopped trying to be spiritual and simply allowed yourself to be whole? Let that question open something soft in you. Let it undo the need to prove. Let it invite you back, not to effort, but to essence. There's a kind of hope that doesn't lift you. It keeps you chasing. It begins innocently. A vision board filled with dreams, a list of manifestations, a deep desire to believe that something beautiful is just around the corner. You start noticing signs, repeating numbers, serendipities. Each one feels like a whisper from the universe saying, "It's coming." And for a moment, your heart rises. But then, the moment passes. The sign fades. Nothing changes. And what rises just as quickly is the crash, the return to doubt, to waiting, to needing another sign to feel okay again. This is not hope. This is a biochemical roller coaster. Neuroscience calls it the dopamine loop. Every time you get a little hit of progress or a symbol of something greater, your brain releases dopamine, a chemical of anticipation. It feels good, uplifting, energizing, but that high is temporary. When it fades, the body crashes into a lower state. You begin to feel empty, restless. And so you seek the next spike, another video, another affirmation, another confirmation that what you want is still on the way. And slowly, without realizing it, you become addicted to the idea of manifestation rather than the state of being that creates it. This addiction is not about the future, it's about escape. It keeps you locked in a pattern where your vibration depends on external feedback, where your sense of peace is postponed until something outside of you changes. But manifestation doesn't work that way. Neville Goddard taught that we do not create by waiting, we create by being, by living in the state of the wish fulfilled, not in the hope that one day it might arrive. When you're waiting, you're not being. When you're watching for signs, you're still tethered to lack. Your eyes are on the horizon, but your energy is still in the absence of what you desire. This is the trap. The more you chase the feeling of hope, the more you reinforce the vibration of not yet. The truth is, real creation happens in presence, in stillness, in the quiet certainty that what you desire is not arriving. It is already you, already within you, already vibrating in the field, drawn by your congruence, not your craving. Hope is beautiful when it arises naturally, when it's an expression of your alignment. But when it becomes a crutch, a fix, a condition for joy, it begins to rob you of the very state that draws your future closer. So ask gently, are you living in the fullness of now or surviving on glimpses of later? That question doesn't demand an answer. It invites a pause, a breath, a return to the only place where true power lives, not in the next sign, but in this one. Not in the proof, but in the presence. There's a moment when healing stops flowing and starts circling, when feeling your emotions becomes less about release and more about rehearsal. You think you're moving through the pain, but really you're orbiting it, naming it, analyzing it, dissecting every trigger, every memory, every nuance of why you feel what you feel. You're doing the work, or so it seems, but deep down, something isn't shifting. You're still waking up in the same emotional climate, still talking about the same wounds, still processing the same stories over and over again, as if the very act of feeling has become a shelter, one that protects you from something deeper, the unknown self that lives on the other side of the narrative. Emotional bloat is real. It happens when we over-identify with our inner work, when the story of our healing becomes the story of who we are, not consciously, not deliberately, but subtly, as a way to stay in the familiar, because the familiar, even when painful, is safe, predictable, contained. There was a client who once said, "I've been working on this for 3 years." And she had. She journaled, she attended retreats, she cried, reflected, forgave, and remembered. And yet, her emotional baseline hadn't changed, because while her mind had grown, her vibration had not. She was not healing. She was circling, naming the pain without integrating it, feeling it without releasing it. Joe Dispenza would call this a feedback loop, a neurochemical rehearsal of the same emotions, which the body interprets as identity. You are not just feeling sadness, you are becoming someone who lives in the frequency of sadness, not by choice, but by repetition. And so the question becomes, what is the purpose of your processing? Is it to evolve or to preserve? Are you feeling to integrate or feeling to remain familiar? True emotional release does not require endless digging. It requires presence, a moment of soft, unresisted contact with what is, and then a willingness to move beyond the story, not by force, not by bypassing, but by choosing not to rehearse the pain once it has spoken, because your emotions are messengers, not destinations. They are sacred, necessary, but they are not meant to become your home. Imagine carrying a bag of old letters, each one meaningful, each one a piece of your story. But you don't need to read them every day. You don't need to sleep with them, eat with them, carry them into every moment. You can honor them, thank them, and then put them down. Who are you when you stop telling the story of who you've been? That's where you begin to rise, not as someone fixed, but as someone free. There's a kind of suffering that never speaks out loud. It hides behind smiles, behind good intentions, behind quiet nods of admiration. It's the silent weight of comparison, not about beauty, not about success, but about vibration, about progress, about how evolved you believe you are compared to someone else. You scroll through social media and see someone sharing their breakthroughs, their manifestations, their peace. And even though you're genuinely happy for them, a subtle voice arises within. Why not me? Why am I still struggling? What am I missing? That voice isn't loud, but it's persistent. It doesn't attack you, it doubts you. And that doubt, repeated enough times, becomes shame. Shame that you're not as high vibe as you should be. Shame that your healing is taking longer. Shame that despite all the books, all the practices, all the work, you still feel like something is missing. And this comparison doesn't push you forward. It pulls you under, quietly, invisibly, like putting weights in your backpack while climbing a mountain. You may still be moving, but the journey becomes heavy, unnecessarily heavy. The most painful part? This comparison often comes dressed as inspiration. You tell yourself, they motivate me, or it's good to have a benchmark. But in truth, you're measuring your unique path against someone else's timing, someone else's nervous system, someone else's karma. And there's no clarity in that, only distortion, because your vibration is not a competition. It's not a race. It's a frequency, intimate, sacred, deeply personal. It responds not to how much you've achieved, but to how much you've aligned with what is real for you. And that alignment has no timeline, no hierarchy, no universal checklist. The moment you compare your frequency to another's, you step out of presence. You disconnect from your own center. You create an illusion that says, they are ahead, I am behind. But in a spiritual journey, there is no ahead. There is no behind. There is only depth. And that depth is measured by how honestly you can meet yourself. Bruce Lipton reminds us that belief shapes biology. If you believe you're behind, your cells will respond accordingly. Your body will mirror the shame. Your vibration will echo it. Not because it's true, but because you've rehearsed it. And so the invitation is not to stop comparing. That's just another command. The invitation is to notice the moment comparison arises and return gently, compassionately to your breath, your path, your now, because your journey is not theirs. It never was. It was written for you. It is unfolding for you. And its wisdom, its sacred timing, is enough. So ask yourself with softness, what would your vibration feel like if you weren't comparing it? Let that question linger in the silence, because in that silence, you might just remember who you really are. There's a moment in the healing journey when you're told to just let go of fear, let go of attachment, let go of what no longer serves. And in theory, this sounds like freedom. In theory, it sounds like awakening. But sometimes this letting go becomes something else entirely, a quiet kind of escape, a spiritualized form of avoidance disguised as transcendence. You tell yourself you've surrendered. You repeat it like a mantra, but beneath the surface, there's a tightening, a subtle recoil from what still lives in your body. You've let go of the story, but not the sensation. You've detached from the person, but not the pain. And instead of sitting with what hurts, you float above it, numb, disconnected, spiritually composed, but emotionally absent. Presence isn't always peaceful. In fact, at first, it rarely is. Because to truly be here, in this body, in this breath, in this now, you have to feel what you've avoided for years. You have to touch the old fear that still lives in your gut. You have to hear the grief that's been whispering beneath your busyness. You have to meet the part of you that was left behind, not with judgment, not with strategy, but with presence. And presence, real presence, is sacred, not because it always feels good, but because it's honest, because it refuses to bypass what still needs to be felt. Letting go is not the absence of feeling. It's the willingness to stay with the discomfort until it no longer controls you, until it dissolves. Not because you forced it to leave, but because you no longer feared its message. Joe Dispenza speaks of the moment when the old self begins to die. It's uncomfortable. The body resists, the mind rebels, because the familiar is dissolving, the known is unraveling, and what replaces it is unknown, unstructured, open. And that openness feels like loss, until you realize it's liberation. We've been conditioned to seek relief, but relief is not the same as healing. Relief often comes from escaping. Healing comes from staying. So what if presence is not your enemy? What if the pain it surfaces is not a block, but a passage? What if sitting in that discomfort, without running, without numbing, without fixing, is your rite of passage into a new vibration? You don't need to force stillness. Stillness is already here, waiting beneath the noise. And when you stop trying to escape the discomfort and instead allow it, something ancient shifts, something old releases, something true emerges. And maybe, just maybe, that's where freedom begins. Not in letting go as a means of escape, but as a sacred act of return. In a world that prizes movement, ambition, and declaration, stillness can feel like failure. Silence can feel like absence. And doing nothing, especially when you're trying to create a better life, can feel like giving up. But what if it's the opposite? What if the very state you avoid, the one that feels unproductive or uninspired or uncertain, is the one that holds your highest frequency? We've been taught to set intentions, to speak what we want, to visualize, to align. And these tools are beautiful. They focus the mind. They awaken the heart. But sometimes they also create pressure, a quiet sense that if we're not directing energy, we're not generating energy. That if we're not intending, we're not attracting. And so we fill our days with mental scripts, morning declarations, evening reviews, midday resets. We speak our desires into the universe again and again, as if our words alone will bend reality. But underneath all that effort, the energy begins to scatter. The vibration begins to thin, not because you're doing it wrong, but because you're doing too much, with too little stillness in between. Because energy doesn't just respond to clarity, it responds to coherence. And coherence is not born from noise, it's born from presence, from the quiet, embodied knowing that says, I am already aligned. Not because you've said the right words, but because your being is no longer in contradiction. Bruce Lipton reminds us that the subconscious mind, where your true vibration lives, does not respond to language. It responds to frequency, and frequency is shaped not by what you declare out loud, but by the emotional tone of your silence. That's why stillness is so powerful. It reveals the truth beneath your performance. It brings coherence to the surface. It magnetizes from authenticity, not from repetition. Think of the stillness between musical notes. It's not empty, it's alive. It holds the shape of the sound. Without that space, the melody loses meaning. In the same way, your intentions need silence. Your practices need pause. Your energy needs time to reorient, not just toward the future you're calling in, but toward the presence you're living now. A simple moment, 5 minutes of sitting without agenda, without affirmation, without effort, can recalibrate your entire field, not because of what you do, but because of what you stop doing. In that stillness, the noise of doubt dissolves, the static of performance clears, and what remains is essence, resonance, magnetic neutrality. You don't have to prove your worth to the universe. You don't have to perform your readiness. You are the frequency. And sometimes the most powerful way to remember that is to be still enough to feel it. What if silence isn't the absence of creation, but the space where creation begins? Let that question echo in your breath. Let it ring through the spaces you've been filling. Let it guide you not toward more, but toward enough. Your vibration is not a goal. It is not a performance. It is not something you earn through perfection or repetition. It is the natural harmony that arises when what you feel, what you believe, and what you allow are finally in tune, not forced, not fabricated, simply aligned. And that alignment doesn't come from effort. It comes from emotional coherence, the inner congruence between your desire and your permission to receive it. Not the mental permission, the cellular one, the deep, embodied knowing that says, it's safe now. I don't have to carry this anymore. I don't have to strive to be whole. Bruce Lipton reminds us that your beliefs shape your biology, not just your thoughts. Your beliefs, the ones that live in your subconscious, the ones inherited, rehearsed, absorbed, the ones that whisper when you're tired, The ones that set your emotional baseline, no matter what your vision board says. But when you create emotional safety, when you shift your inner permission to feel joy, to feel loved, to feel seen, your biology listens. Your vibration lifts. Not because you fought your way there, but because you stopped fighting yourself. Neville Goddard said it clearly. Live from the state, not toward the state. You don't manifest by pursuing a new frequency. You manifest by remembering it, by embodying it, by letting yourself be the person who already knows what it feels like to be free. And that remembering begins in silence, in truth, in surrender, not as weakness, but as wisdom, because your vibration is a tuning fork. And if it's holding on to emotional residue, old fear, silent guilt, hidden shame, it won't sing clearly. It can't resonate fully. It will hum in distortion, no matter how beautifully you decorate your thoughts. So let the distortion go, not by rejecting it, but by meeting it with softness, with presence, with the willingness to feel without clinging, to release without running, to trust without knowing how. Because the most powerful frequency isn't the loudest, it's the most congruent. It doesn't shout, it doesn't strive, it radiates quietly, consistently, from the inside out. And so now, gently, without pressure, which trap are you ready to leave behind? Not to fix your vibration, but to remember your true resonance, the one that was never lost, only waiting to be felt.